The phone rang at 11:47 on a Tuesday night. I know that because I'd been lying awake in the dark, watching the red numbers on my bedside clock the way I always do when sleep won't come. My name is Gerald Whitmore. I'm 68 years old. I spent 31 years driving freight between Melbourne and Adelaide, and I've never once been the sort of man who jumps at shadows or reads trouble into nothing. But when I saw my son's name on the screen that late, something cold moved through me before I'd even answered. "Dad." His voice was low, controlled in the way people get when they're trying not to let panic through. "Don't turn any lights on. Don't make a sound. Is Darren home?" Darren, my son-in-law. My daughter, Sandra's husband of 4 years. "He's here," I said, keeping my own voice down without even thinking about it. "They both are. Downstairs somewhere. Listen to me very carefully." A pause. I could hear traffic on his end. He was in a car, moving. "I need you to go to the garden shed. Right now. Take your phone. Keep it on silent. And lock yourself in. Don't let either of them know you've gone." I sat up in the dark. "Mate! What on earth?" "Dad." The word came out sharp and quiet at the same time. "Please. I'll explain everything. But I need you to move right now. My son, Marcus, is a detective sergeant with the Victorian Police. He has been for 11 years. In all that time, through everything, he has never once called me like this." I got up. I pulled on my dressing gown and my old work boots without lacing them, and I moved through the dark of the house the way I used to move through the yard when I was a boy and didn't want to wake my father. Slow, deliberate, keeping to the edges of the hallway where the boards don't creak. The light was on under the door of what used to be my wife's sewing room. Sandra and Darren had been using it as an office since they moved in 8 months earlier. "Moved in to help," they'd said. "To look after me." I could hear voices through the door, low, quick, but I didn't stop to listen. I kept moving, down the hall, through the laundry, and out the back door into the cold night air of the Yarra Ranges. October. But the nights still cut through you up here. I crossed the wet grass to the shed, slipped inside, and pulled the door shut behind me. The smell of it hit me immediately, motor oil and rust and something earthy underneath, like a whole life compressed into a small, dark space. I sat on an upturned milk crate and called Marcus back. He answered before the first ring finished. "Are you in the shed?" "Yes." "Good. Keep the door locked." I heard him exhale. "Dad, I'm 40 minutes out. I'm coming to you. Do not go back inside that house tonight. Marcus." I kept my voice steady. "Tell me what's happening." There was a pause that felt longer than it was. "How long have you been feeling unwell?" he asked. I thought about the last 6 months. I thought about the headaches that came in the afternoon and wouldn't shift, the confusion I'd been putting down to age forgetting words mid-sentence, losing track of conversations. Once walking into the kitchen and standing there for a full minute not knowing why I'd come. My GP, Dr. Okonkwo, had run tests in August. "Nothing conclusive," he'd said. "Could be stress. Could be the beginning of something we should monitor." I thought about the vitamins. Sandra had started buying them in April, not long after she and Darren moved in, a whole shelf of them in the bathroom cabinet. She'd been very particular about which ones I took and when. Said she'd read about supplements for men my age, something about cognitive support, joint health. She'd set a little alarm on my phone so I wouldn't forget. Every morning at 7. Every evening at 9. I am not a suspicious man by nature. That's the truth of it. And I'm not ashamed to say so. I raised 2 children in this house with my wife, Roberta, and I trusted the people I loved because that's what you do when you build a life with someone. When Roberta died 3 years ago, ovarian cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the end, I thought the worst thing that could happen to a person had already happened to me. I thought I was past being blindsided. "The supplements," I said into the phone. Marcus was quiet for a moment. We think so. Yes. He told me what he could, driving through the dark with the heater on, and his voice careful and measured the way they train them to be. He'd been contacted 6 weeks earlier by a colleague in the financial crimes unit. A property solicitor in Lilydale had flagged an unusual transaction, a partial transfer of title on a residential property in the Yarra Ranges, initiated by a power of attorney lodged 3 months prior. The property was mine. I hadn't known anything about it. The POA had my signature on it. I looked at my hands in the dark of the shed. I could feel the blood moving through my fingers. I didn't sign anything, I said. I know, Dad. Darren was an account manager for a financial services company in the city. Or so I'd been told. What Marcus had spent the past 6 weeks uncovering carefully, quietly, without telling me because he was terrified of what might happen if Sandra found out he knew was that Darren had no such job. He had a history of elder financial abuse, stretching back 8 years and 2 previous victims. He'd served a suspended sentence in Queensland in 2019 under a different surname. He'd met Sandra 4 years ago. Whether Sandra had known from the beginning or whether she'd been pulled along by him, Marcus said he didn't know yet. He'd hoped she hadn't. He'd spent 6 weeks hoping. What changed tonight? I asked. Why call me now? They filed the second transfer this afternoon, he said. The house, Dad. Full title. It was supposed to go through in 48 hours. My house. Roberta's house. The one we'd bought young and broken our backs to pay off. Where we'd raised Marcus and Sandra, where Roberta had planted the garden beds along the north fence that still bloomed every spring because I couldn't bring myself to let them go. I sat in the cold dark of the shed, and I didn't say anything for a little while. 40 minutes, Marcus said again. I'm coming. It was the longest 40 minutes of my life, and I have driven through a dust storm on the Duke's Highway at 2 in the morning with a blown indicator and a load of steel pipe, so I know something about long minutes. I sat on that milk crate and I let myself think about things I hadn't let myself think about before. The way Sandra had started talking about the house in the abstract. The way you talk about something that isn't entirely yours anymore. The place instead of your place. The property instead of home. The way Darren had started accompanying me to appointments. Speaking to Dr. Okonkwo on my behalf, even when I was right there in the room. The way my head had been so thick with fog some mornings that I'd stood in my own kitchen and felt like a stranger in it. I thought about my neighbor Colleen from up the road, who'd knocked on the door in July to check on me. I'd been short with her, uncharacteristically so. I'd told her I was fine and closed the door, and afterwards Sandra had said, very gently, that she was glad I was setting limits with people who only wanted to pry. At the time, it had seemed reasonable. I thought about how I hadn't spoken to my old friend Barry in nearly 3 months, how his calls had gone unanswered and then stopped, how Sandra had said Barry was probably going through something himself and not to take it personally. Sitting in the dark, I counted up all the small silences and small distances, and I understood that I had been very carefully removed from everyone who might have noticed something was wrong. Marcus arrived at 23 minutes past midnight. He didn't come alone. There were 2 other vehicles, a plain white sedan and a marked divisional van that parked down at the road and cut its lights. He came across the yard with a torch and knocked twice on the shed door, then once, the way we used to do when he was 14 and coming home after curfew. I opened the door and he grabbed me by the shoulder and just held on for a moment. He's 41 years old and built like his grandfather, broad across the back. And he held on in that particular way men hold on to each other when they can't say what they mean. Then he stepped back and looked at me in the torchlight and said, "You all right? Ask me again in a week," I said. He gave a short breath that was almost a laugh. "Fair enough. I won't go through the details of what happened in the house that night, partly because some of it is still before the courts, and partly because I wasn't there to see it. I stayed in the shed with a constable named Priya, who made tea on a little portable burner, who she'd brought in a bag, and who talked to me about cricket statistics until the noise from inside the house had stopped and Marcus came back. Out. Sandra came out between two officers at 1:15. She was wearing her dressing gown, and her face was doing something I'd never seen it do before. Not crying exactly, but pulled apart, like something structural had given way beneath it. She looked at me across the yard, and I looked at her, and neither of us said anything. Darren came out separately, hands behind him, already talking in the rapid defensive way guilty men talk when they've run out of options. I watched the vehicles go down the drive, and I stood in the yard in my unlaced boots and my dressing gown until Marcus came to stand beside me. "She knew," he said quietly. "Not a question. How much?" "Enough." He paused. "The supplements were her idea, Dad. She researched them. Found out what compounds in quantity could mimic early cognitive decline without showing up as obviously toxic. She ordered them to a post office box in Healesville. I looked at Roberta's garden beds along the north fence. The roses were just beginning to show their October buds. Pale and tight, nothing yet. "She grew up in that garden," I said. Marcus didn't answer. There was nothing to answer. The toxicology report took 3 weeks. Dr. Okonkwo rang me on a Thursday afternoon, and he was professional and thorough, and I could hear underneath his professional thoroughness how angry he was on my behalf. A combination of compounds, high-dose sedating antihistamines, and a particular herbal extract that in sustained quantities interferes with acetylcholine function. Nothing that would kill a person quickly. Something that would, over 12 to 18 months, make a 68-year-old man seem to be losing his mind, make him seem to need managing, make him seem unable to handle his own affairs. I stopped taking anything from an unlabeled bottle after that night in the shed. Within 6 weeks, the headaches were largely gone. Within 3 months, I felt more like myself than I had in over a year. When I went back to Dr. Okonkwo for a full review, he sat across from me and shook his head slowly and said, "Gerald, I should have pushed harder." "You didn't know," I said. "No," he said. "But someone should have asked better questions." The case went to the county court in Melbourne the following February. I sat in the public gallery with Marcus on one side and my old friend Barry on the other. Barry, who'd driven down from Shepperton the moment I'd called him, who'd said mate in a voice that told me everything about how much I'd been missed. Darren Kellaway, and yes, Kellaway was one of 3 surnames he'd used across his adult life, was convicted on 5 counts, including obtaining financial advantage by deception, elder financial abuse, and 1 count relating to the deliberate administration of substances to impair. His barrister made much of the complexity of the scheme, as though complexity were a kind of mitigation. The judge was not moved. He received 7 years with a non-parole period of 4. Sandra Whitmore, she'd never taken his surname, which I used to think was a matter of practicality and now understand differently, pleaded guilty to 2 counts. She received 3 years and 8 months. Her barrister spoke about coercive control, about the possibility that she herself had been a victim of Darren's manipulation. The judge acknowledged this as a partial factor. I didn't stand outside the courtroom and weigh it. I'm still not sure I'm capable of weighing it fairly. She was my daughter. She grew up in the house by Roberta's garden. She used to bring me tea on Sunday mornings when she was 8 years old, both hands on the mug so she wouldn't spill it. I don't know how to hold all of that at once. Some days I manage it better than others. Colleen from up the road brought a casserole the week after the trial. Barry came down again in April, and we drove out to the Yarra Valley and walked for 3 hours without talking much, which is sometimes exactly what's needed. Marcus calls every second day more than he used to, and I don't tell him to stop. I had the title on the house reviewed and confirmed. The partial transfer was voided when the POA was found to have been fraudulently executed. My solicitor, a sharp woman named Patricia, who I wish I'd found 10 years earlier, walked me through every document with a patience that made me feel like an intelligent adult rather than an inconvenience. That matters more than people might think. In June, I had the garden beds along the north fence re-edged, and I put in new mulch, and I staked the climbing rose on the eastern end that had started leaning. I did it myself. On a Saturday morning, in the sun, Roberta planted those roses in 2003. They bloomed that October the same as every year. Red, stubborn, indifferent to everything that had tried to happen around them. If you are older, and someone you love has moved in to help you, please hear this. Genuine help does not require your signature on documents you haven't read. Genuine help does not come between you and your friends. Genuine help does not speak to your doctor on your behalf without your explicit request. And genuine help does not require you to feel, slowly and quietly, like a guest in your own life. A power of attorney is a serious legal instrument. It should only ever be granted to someone you trust, without qualification, ideally with the guidance of an independent solicitor who is acting for you and you alone, not someone recommended by the person who wants the authority. If you are confused, if your memory feels different to how it used to, if you are taking supplements or medications arranged by someone else, please speak to your GP independently. Go alone to an appointment. Ask for a full review. If you have an adult child you trust, call them. If you've lost touch with friends, reach back out. The discomfort of an awkward call is nothing beside the alternative. I spent 8 months being made smaller in my own home, in my own life. I lost 8 months of clarity, of presence, of being fully myself. I am angry about that, and I think I'm allowed to be angry about it. But I am also still here, in this house, in this garden, in full possession of my own mind and my own name. That's the part that matters. That's the part they didn't manage to take.